So in the final round of the Minnesota GM Norm Round Robin Tournament, I was paired against Grandmaster Vladimir Georgiev, the third GM in the tournament, and I decided to start with one knight f3. I wasn't sure what system he would go for here exactly. He's been playing a lot of 1d6, 1d5, g6, knight f6, basically all kinds of stuff. He decides to go for d5. I played e3. This was the same line I played against Andrew Hong earlier in the tournament, so I felt pretty comfortable here. I wasn't sure exactly whether he wanted to do a Queen's Gambit decline setup or maybe Slav with c6. But he goes knight f6, c4, e6, actually repeating my game against Andrew, so I guess he felt like this was maybe a comfortable setup for black. b3 and b6. In that game, black played c5, and then bishop b2, knight c6 took place. With b6, black is kind of indicating he wants a different setup. He wants to put the bishop on b7 pretty early, and that usually means that the knight is going to go to d7, where it's kind of more harmonious with black's setup. So bishop b2, bishop b7. Now it's time for white to play d4. I don't think we can really justify waiting much longer. Black played a6 here, knight c3, and bishop d6. I think the main point of playing a6 early on is to watch out for any kind of knight b5 ideas, especially if black wants to put the bishop on d6. Here I took on d5, e takes d5. This is pretty standard, I think, to take on d5 in this type of position. There's just no benefit for white to keep waiting, and at a certain point black is just going to take on c4 and play c5, and so white should try to avoid that. So c takes d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5 I think is not so great for black, because now white is not necessarily going to take a second time, and if we do take on d5 again, e d5, then black kind of exchanged off the strong knight that often just goes to e4, and so this is kind of simplifying things in white's favor, I think. So he just goes for the direct e d5, and I played bishop d3. And I actually got, I think, almost this exact position in two more games that took place at the World Open. In the first game, I played bishop d3, similar to this, and I think we just got a direct transposition after like castles, knight bd7. In the other game, that one went a little bit differently. Instead of playing an early a6, black played early knight bd7, and as you'll see, things ended up developing quite differently, actually. But I realize now that instead of playing bishop d3, with black having already committed to a6, it's actually better simply to play g3 in this position. Which seems a little bit counterintuitive because we've already opened up the bishop to be developed on this diagonal. But in fact, the bishop is going to sit really nicely on g2 here. And I think this is actually would be a fairly comfortable position for white to play. It's very similar to something you might get in the Queen's Indian, where white often goes g3, bishop g2 anyway. And I think actually white has a really nice setup for this structure. Whenever black plays c5, they're not really ever going to be threatening to take on d4 because we'll take with the knight and leave them with an isolani. But there will be cases where white wants to play d takes c5 ourselves and leave black with hanging pawns under good circumstances. So yeah, if I had another chance, I would love to play g3, but okay, for this game I decided to go with bishop d3. I simply didn't realize g3 was possible. Black castled, I castled, and knight d7. And actually with this move, my opponent offered me a draw, which I really didn't think too long about rejecting, because at this point I felt like my tournament was basically over. It actually wasn't too surprising of an offer because he was not in contention for any of the top three prizes. In fact, I believe the top three places were already kind of determined, or at least the three players were determined, but who gets what was still up for grabs because they were facing each other. But for everyone else, the tournament was basically over, and without much to fight for, yeah, early draw offers are often to be expected. So I figured, okay, time to take a rest. The World Open was starting basically the following day. So after this round, a few of us ended up flying to Philadelphia that evening, and then the next tournament was starting the following night. So I figured, okay, it's totally reasonable to take a rest, and try to recharge for the next tournament. That said, the interesting thing is that I actually got to play almost this exact position a few rounds later in the World Open. So you'll get to see how it actually can play out, with White's next move being Rook C1. All right, guys. So that wraps it up for this tournament. I ended up with 4 points out of 9, which was like half a point shy of what I was aiming to achieve in the tournament. Still, I felt like the tournament had some really interesting games. I was happy with my 2 wins, the first over Andrew and second over Christopher Yu. But I was pretty disappointed with some of my losses, especially the loss in the previous game where I felt like it was a very easy draw and I kind of blundered it all away in one move. And the loss against Gary Shankar in that endgame I also felt was kind of unnecessary and could have been avoided. So had I saved those 2 games and gotten those 2 half points, then the tournament probably would have been really solid with 5 points out of 9. I think it would be absolutely nothing to complain about, but still kind of shy of that 6.5 mark, which I think is really tough to aim for. But okay, that's what this is all about. So I'm going to wrap up this series for now, but I'll see you guys very soon as I'm going to start covering my games from the World Open coming up next. So until then, take care.